Okay, finally we're going to make a chocolate bar. But before we do, we have to temper our chocolate. So I'm at about 121 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to talk primarily in Fahrenheit. I work in both centigrade and Fahrenheit, but to be honest, when I temper, I always talk in Fahrenheit. Don't ask me why, but that's just the way it is. So what I've got to do is, again, I've got to continually work with this and cool it down. It's going to take some time, and normally I would say you don't have to watch me cool this because we've really got to take some time to cool it down. But there's a lot of stuff we have to talk about as well before we get started. And so what we're doing now is we're tempering chocolate. And if you look at a really well-made chocolate bar, what you'll see when you open it is that it will have a beautiful glossy finish. And you can keep that bar at room temperature, provided it's not too hot. So let's say not above 80 degrees, but you know, in the range of 65 to 75, you can keep that bar indefinitely and it will stay shiny. And when you break it, it will have a good snap. And that's because that chocolate has been tempered. Why do we need to temper chocolate? It's because cocoa butter is a fantastic fat. It's the fat that's present in the cocoa nib. It's the only fat in a pure dark chocolate. It's the only fat in our chocolate. Sometimes they add a little milk fat to dark chocolate, and that's to manipulate the crystals. But in a classic artisan chocolate bar, dark chocolate, it's the only fat is cocoa butter. And cocoa butter is wonderful. It's really fabulous because we are able to put a piece of chocolate in our mouth and it melts almost instantaneously into a creamy mass on our tongue, which liberates this wonderful flavor that we call chocolate. And that's because the melting point of cocoa butter is roughly the same as our body temperature. And that's what makes it the perfect fat for an eating chocolate. But unfortunately, cocoa butter can form many different types of crystals. Crystals are just the way solids come together, and fats are solids at room temperature. They form crystals. And cocoa butter can actually form 6 different types of crystals. And unfortunately, we only want one of those 6, all right? And those 6 crystals are, well, they have a really unoriginal name. They're called form 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 6 forms, they each have a name, all right? The first 4 are unstable. Well, when I say unstable, they will when the chocolate solidifies. So let's back up a little bit. If I just don't temper chocolate, if I just let this chocolate cool without stirring it at room temperature, or say I put it in the refrigerator, what will happen will be that I'll get a mixture of all the different crystals, form 1 through 6, all right? And the lower number forms, the lower melting point forms, are very unstable. So when I take the chocolate out of the refrigerator, or I just look at the chocolate that's been left to solidify, what happens is the unstable crystals, they melt and then they reform because the universe moves from unstable to stable. So we have a law, a universal law, that things go from the unstable form to the more stable form, and that applies to chocolate as well. So the unstable crystals, which have the lower melting point, they will remelt and form the stable crystals. The problem is that when they remelt and form the stable crystals, the crystallization is uncontrolled. Tempering is a controlled crystallization. But if you have uncontrolled crystallization, then what happens is those crystals form, and they form large crystals, very large. And the large crystals are visible to the eye. And that's what gives an untempered chocolate or a detempered chocolate, that kind of white, grayish, mousy kind of appearance, it makes them look dull and unappealing because they've lost their gloss. And if the chocolate is totally untempered, has never been tempered, those crystals formed internally are huge. And it also, in addition to being unsightly, having that kind of grayish color, the crystals are really big inside. So when you bite into it, they're actually sandy. They give like a sandy texture. So we have the problem of tempering chocolate. However, chocolate tempering is not as hard as it seems, all right? And so there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm going to demonstrate one of them, all right? You can actually temper chocolate by adding another piece. If we were cooling this chocolate down, once I got to be around 93 degrees Fahrenheit, or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, I could throw in a small amount of tempered chocolate. And that tempered chocolate would seed with the stable crystals, the chocolate that I'm stirring, and that would make it tempered. That would automatically temper it. And that's one way to do it. So when we go to the marble, and we're going to talk about that later, when we go to the marble, at that point, I could actually just add some tempered chocolate and just continue stirring, and the whole mass would be tempered, and I could make my bars that way. The problem is you need tempered chocolate to do that. So what I'm going to show you how to do is to start from scratch with nothing. So we call this virgin chocolate because there are no crystals. Right now we're at 102, all right? And the reason I'm stirring it is that not only do we want stable crystals, but we want small crystals, all right? Because small crystals you can't see. And that's what makes that shiny appearance on the bar. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to keep stirring this, all right? I've got to watch it. I've got to work kind of quickly because, we've got to get going, and I don't want to reheat it, because sometimes that can give a bad effect. So once I start, I like to finish. Now, what I'm going to do, all right, is what we're going to do, we're going to temper on marble, all right? So this is a marble, all right? And my room here is about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a good temperature to work with, all right? I've got to keep stirring here. But that's a good temperature to keep working with, all right? And this marble really holds the cold, all right? You usually say hold the heat, but it holds the cold. So this marble stays very cold and is not resistant to any type of change. And so it's a very good working surface to crystallize chocolate. So what I'm going to do, this is a dark chocolate, and I'm at 99 now, so I've got to work pretty fast. I'm going to cool this chocolate down to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Probably about 95.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just going to keep working at it. We're at 99, all right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take about 1/3 of that chocolate, and I'm going to spread it on that marble. And I'm going to spread it out with a spatula. I have two. I have a curved, an angled spatula and a straight spatula. I like to use the straight spatula. All right, and I have a scraper. And I'm going to spread that chocolate out on this marble, and I'm going to let it crystallize because it's going to cool very fast. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to form 3 or 4 different types of crystals. Now, I only want one. But I'm going to form 3, probably even 4 different types of crystals here. And what I'm going to do that is just by spreading it and scraping it and spreading it. And you'll see that. And then when that chocolate begins to crystallize, and I can tell by the eye because it starts to get a velvety appearance, I'm going to put it back in the rest of the chocolate, which is still hot. It's still back around 95, all right? And all of those crystals, except the one I want, because the one I want melts at around 95, so it won't melt, you know, are going to melt away, and I'm going to be left with just the crystal I want, just the Form 5 crystal. And then that Form 5 crystal will serve as the seed to form more crystals. And so that will assure that my chocolate will form in the right crystal form and be properly tempered. So we're almost there. I'm almost ready, all right? And I apologize, we're gonna have to work fast, so, whoops. So I'm not gonna do too much talking, all right? All right, but I'm almost there. I'm at 96. When I get to be about 95.5, and it differs. You'll have to find the right temperature yourself, but it's gonna be in the ballpark. All right, so I'm at 95.5. So I'm gonna put about a third of my chocolate. It gets a little messy there. And as I say, I'm not a chocolatier, and so I don't work quite as artistically as some. But I'm gonna spread that out. You can see, I'm letting it crystallize, all right? And then I scrape it up, mix those crystals in. All right, and I can even feel it starting to crystallize already. My room is pretty cold here, all right? You're working in the tropics, it may be more difficult to find a cold room. But above, like say 75, very difficult to work. All right, so I've got my crystals now, so I've got to work really quick, all right? And I'm gonna mix it back in. And I'm just gonna put that chocolate back in, all right? Now again, I apologize because I actually do this quite a bit to evaluate chocolate, to actually evaluate cocoa beans from suppliers. I usually make a chocolate. I've done that with some Salvadorians. All right, so I'm gonna leave that there. And now I'm stirring it back in, okay? All right, now if you let it go too far, you get lumps. And that's the problem I do. I tend to over-temper because I don't trust myself sometimes, all right? And I should. But now, that chocolate is all reincorporated. The unstable crystals were melted by mixing it back into the warm chocolate, all right? And I'm gonna make a bar, all right? So I'm just gonna make, well, let's see. All right, so I don't know if you can really see this, but I'm gonna pour that chocolate into the mold cavity. I'm gonna make 2 because I wanna have enough chocolate left for the inclusions. All right, so I poured that in there. Now, again, the polycarbonate molds work very well because then I can spread the chocolate out and fill the mold up and also get all of the bubbles out. Now that's tempered chocolate. It's done. I've got 1 bubble that I can get out. Well, that's gonna stay. All right, so I'm gonna put this in a cold room. I have a little colder area here. I'm gonna put this in there and that will start it to solidify. But actually I don't have to do that. As long as my temperature is good, I'm, you know, as long as I'm 65, 70 degrees, those bars will solidify perfectly at room temperature. So now let's add our inclusions. So remember, we've got chocolate and almonds. It's actually, or excuse me, not chocolate almonds, we've got cherries and almonds, and that's a really great combination. I really recommend it if you can get good cherries. And I've got a lot of inclusions, man. And I'm fortunate, all right? Maybe I got too much. All right, we'll see. All right, but yeah, maybe a little much. Actually, yeah, no, it'll go. It'll work. It's going to be a little chunky, but we'll be fine. All right. So we're going to fill these molds up with the inclusions. Now let's see what I can get, if these will spread out for me. You can see how chunky that is. Now you never get that chunkiness from a commercial bar. And I can guarantee you when you bite into this, it will be really full of flavor. So let me see if I can spread these guys out. All right, so see the back of those bars? Really, we've got a lot of chunkiness there. That'll be really have an excellent bite. Every bite will have a crunch of almonds and cherries and stuff, and really quite nice. Now, I don't recommend putting these bars in the refrigerator, all right? Because you don't want them to cool too fast, all right? Because if we cool too fast, we can actually break the temper, which means we can reform those unstable crystals. So what I do, I have a room that's probably about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to put these bars in there. It'll probably take about 30 or 35 minutes for them to solidify. And then we'll come back and have a look at what we made. Okay, now I'm back, and I know we got a good temper, and the way I can tell we have a good temper is look at my spatula and see that shiny chocolate on the spatula. It's already solidified, and I can tell I've got good gloss, good shine. All right, and also even in the bowl, it's got good gloss and shine. All right, so I know we're gonna have a good bar. All right, so I always wonder, especially when I'm demonstrating, because it would be nice not to make a mistake, but that's good. So let's, I'm just trying to think. Now, if we had used these, there's a lot of tricks you can do, all right? For example, if your chocolate is thin enough, all right, which usually high cacao chocolates are, we can make a shell, all right? So what we would do is we would just pour the chocolate in the mold, and then we'd go like this, just scrape off the extra chocolate, and then we bang it, and what would form would be just a shell around the surface of the mold. And then when that's solidified, we would take it out, and what we would have is we'd have pieces of chocolate that are hollow. And we can take those and add a center, so we can make a ganache, we can make a cream or whatever, and we can fill the center. And then we just pat it down so the center, fills out, and then we'll just we'll retemper the chocolate and put some on top, and again scrape it across like that, and we'll have a bonbon, which is a filled chocolate. So that's really it as far as we're bean to bar. We'll come back in about 30 minutes and take a look at the bars we made, and that will be it. Oh, I'm gonna start a milk chocolate. We'll also look at the beginning of a milk chocolate. It really runs exactly like a dark chocolate, except the formulation's different, and there's some other things we have to take into consideration. So we'll put together a milk chocolate. I don't think we'll have time to, a milk chocolate actually takes a lot longer to make. It actually takes almost almost 8 hours in the melanger, all right? But it's the same thing. At the end, you fill it, you finish it with lecithin and vanilla, take it out, put it into a plastic Tupperware, and then the next day, come back and temper it. The only thing with the milk chocolate is that the milk has its own fat. It has milk fat. And milk fat destabilizes the crystallization of cocoa butter. Actually, it doesn't destabilize it as much as it lowers it. And milk chocolate kind of, milk fat works its way into the crystal structure of the cocoa butter and results in a lower melting point cocoa butter, or lower melting point chocolate. And so milk chocolate, whereas I cooled here, I started at 95 and went on to the marble at 95. On milk chocolate, I would go on to the marble at, say, 92, all right? Now, white chocolate just has cocoa butter, milk, and sugar. There's no nibs in white chocolate. And so there's actually more milk fat in white chocolate than in milk chocolate. And so white chocolate, I have to temper even at a colder, I even have to go lower. So for a milk chocolate, or for a white chocolate, I go on to the marble at maybe 89 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's stop here. We'll come back, we'll look at our bars. That'll just be a brief look. We can see what we did, and then we'll do the milk chocolate, okay?